Alright guys, so we're almost ready to start learning how to learn HTML, CSS, build websites, but before we do that we need a couple things. What's good about learning HTML and CSS is it doesn't take much to get started. If you're learning a more complex language like let's say PHP or Python or something like that, usually you'll need to install a web server locally so that you can develop on your local machine, and that takes a lot more work. Some languages even need to be compiled and you need something called an IDE, but with HTML CSS, we can simply click on an HTML file and run it in a browser. We can also edit it with a text editor. So those are the two things we need, is a browser and a text editor. Now, it doesn't matter what operating system you're on. If you're using Windows, Mac, Linux, you can see I'm on a Mac, but everything we do in this course, it doesn't matter what you're on. And if there is something little that's specific to Windows, I will mention it for you guys that are using Windows. Now, your system comes with a browser and a text editor. So for Windows you have, for instance, Edge and Notepad. For Mac you have Safari and TextEdit, but these are not good for web development, especially the text editors. For a browser, I would definitely recommend Google Chrome. It's the most popular in the web development community. It's very fast. It's fast to adapt new features in CSS, JavaScript, and so on. It also has really great development tools. Second to Chrome, I would say Firefox. As far as a text editor, you don't want to use Notepad or anything like that because there's no features, there's no syntax highlighting, anything like that. There's a lot of choices, but what I would recommend and what I'm going to use is Visual Studio Code. And I use this for everything. I don't just use it for HTML, CSS. I also use it for PHP, JavaScript, Python, any language that I work with, because it's just very fast, it's intuitive, has a lot of features, it has great extensions, and it's just all around, it's just a great editor. So that's what we'll be using. I don't have it installed, so I'm going to go ahead and download it, and it's available for Windows, Mac, or Linux. Doesn't matter what system you're on. So on a Mac, it's just going to give me the zip file. I'll go ahead and open it up or unpackage it, and you can see I have my icon here, and I'm just going to bring it to my applications folder. Okay, so once it's in there, I can open it up. I'm actually going to drag it down to my bar, which you guys can't see, just so I can easily access it, and then I'll go ahead and open it. So when you first open up VS Code, you'll see a welcome page. It'll give you some options like open up a file, open a folder. It'll show your recent projects, and the only reason I have recent projects is because I already had VS Code installed. I just uninstalled it for this course. If also over here, if you want to change your theme, so if I click color theme, it'll open up this, which is the command palette. And for instance, we could change it to a light theme, and you can kind of experiment with these a little bit. I'm just going to keep the regular dark theme like that. So let's close this welcome page up and head over to the sidebar. So this first icon here is your file explorer. So when you have a website or a web application, it's going to be in a folder, and you're going to want to open that folder so that you can see the files and access them easily. So I actually have a folder that is on my desktop that I'm going to open, called Split Landing Page, which is just a very simple website with some JavaScript and HTML, CSS. So I'm going to open that, and you'll see that I have the files over here. So we have one HTML file, we have a CSS file for styling, and then we have a JavaScript file. And when I just click them once, notice that they just open and they just stay in this one tab, and then it kind of closes when I click on the next one. If I double click, it'll stay. So if I go click on the next file, notice that the HTML, index HTML stayed there. Okay, if I double click this one, it'll stay there, and then I can just close them up. Okay, and we'll be working in the File Explorer quite a bit. So the next thing I want to show you is the settings. Now this text right here is way too small, especially for doing a course. You guys probably can barely read this. So to get to the settings, you can go to this little gear, and you can go to settings, or you can do control comma on a Windows machine, or command comma on a Mac, and that'll also bring you to the settings. As we go along here, I'm going to be teaching you guys some of the keyboard shortcuts, because your workflow really speeds up when you learn shortcuts. And when we write our code, our HTML, CSS, I'm going to teach you some shortcuts to navigate around really easily as well. So what I want to change is the font size, which is actually right here, editor font size. But if I couldn't find this, I could just search for it up here. So I could say font size, and you can see now it's at the top here. It's 14 pixels by default, so I want to change it to 26, and that should take effect right away. The only other setting I want to change is my tab space. So if I type in tab spaces, the default is 4, and what this means is the number of spaces that it indents when you hit tab. Okay, because in HTML and in most languages, you're gonna indent to organize your code, but 4 is a little too much for me. I like to keep it at 2, so I'm going to change that to 2, and that should save right away. So let's close up the settings, and now if I go back to, let's say, index.html, notice the font is much bigger. Okay, and a tab now is 2 spaces as opposed to 4. So the last thing I want to do is just go over these other icons. This one is just to search. So if you want to search within the page, you can also replace. This is for version control with Git. We're not going to get into that right now. This is a debugger for programming languages like Python, JavaScript, and so on. Also something we're not going to get into. But this one right here, the last one, is your extensions. Okay, so you can extend the functionality of VS Code with a whole bunch of extensions, and we don't have any installed right now, but it does show some of the popular ones, shows us some of the recommendations. If you want to search, you can search, like let's say we're using PHP. If we want to search for PHP extensions, like this one right here, IntelliSense, and if we click on that, it'll show us a bunch of documentation and examples. Basically, this gives you some PHP drop downs, as you can see right here. If we wanted to install this, we could just click the green install button and it would simply get installed. And if I make this a little bigger, you can see the number of downloads. You can see this one has 5.7 million downloads and a rating of 3.5. Okay, so you see the number of downloads as well as the ratings. And I do have a couple extensions that I want to install later, but I don't want to get into that right now. All right, so now that you have VS Code set up, in the next section, we're going to jump in and we're going to start to learn HTML.